The link between World War I and World War II, could there be a World War III? The connection between World War I and World War II. Introduction: the war to end all wars. Never again. These were the words uttered in countless languages in November 1918, when the guns of the First World War finally fell silent. After 4 years of mechanized slaughter, Europe was devastated. More than 16 million lives had been lost, empires that had ruled for centuries lay in ruins, and entire societies were exhausted. US President Woodrow Wilson, in his address to Congress, declared that the war must make the world safe for democracy. Yet just 2 decades later, in 1939, the world was once again plunged into the deadliest conflict in human history, World War II. How could this happen so quickly? Was it inevitable? Or could it have been prevented? To answer these questions, we must follow the chain of events that connected the two wars: the fragile peace settlements, the economic collapse of the 1930s, the rise of fascism and extremism, and the failures of international diplomacy. Along the way, we will see how unresolved grievances, reckless leadership, and missed opportunities led humanity down the road to its greatest catastrophe. In this documentary, we uncover the hidden links between World War I and World War II. We'll explore how a peace treaty meant to secure the future actually planted the seeds of destruction, how economic depression fueled extremism, and how the failure of world leaders to act decisively allowed tyranny to rise unchecked. And as we examine this history, we'll also reflect on modern crises, from Russia's invasion of Ukraine to the Israel-Hamas conflict, that remind us how fragile peace can be, and how quickly global tensions can spiral into larger wars. Was World War II inevitable? And could the same mistakes lead us into a potential World War III? For history, as Winston Churchill once warned, is not merely the past, it is the guide to the future. Let's dive deep into the connections that textbooks often summarize, but rarely explain in detail. Section 1. The aftermath of World War I. The First World War destroyed the foundations of Europe's old order. The German, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires collapsed, leaving behind fragile new states struggling to survive. Political revolutions swept across the continent, from Bolshevism in Russia to nationalist movements in Eastern Europe. Millions of soldiers returned home to shattered economies, unemployment, and disillusionment. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 was supposed to secure peace. Instead, it planted the seeds of future conflict. Germany was forced to accept the infamous War Guilt Clause, Article 231, taking full responsibility for the war. Reparations were imposed that crippled its economy, stripping it of industrial regions, overseas colonies, and limiting its army to just 100,000 men. The German delegation described the treaty as a diktat, a dictated peace. German politician Gustav Stresemann later remarked, "The economic position is only flourishing on the surface. Germany is dancing on a volcano. The situation is not sound. The mark is losing value, the masses are desperate, and the political structure is unstable." Meanwhile, the League of Nations was established to prevent future wars. But its foundation was weak. The United States, ironically, never joined, despite Wilson's vision. Without American support, the League lacked credibility, resources, and enforcement power. The tension between the rhetoric of peace and the reality of punishment created an unstable order. French Marshal Ferdinand Foch predicted ominously after signing Versailles, "This is not peace. It is an armistice for 20 years. His words would prove chillingly accurate. Section 2. A peace built on resentment. In the years that followed, Germany struggled under the burden of reparations. In 1923, hyperinflation spiraled out of control. A loaf of bread cost billions of marks. Families carried wheelbarrows of cash to buy food. The middle class, once the backbone of stability, was ruined. A teacher from Berlin wrote in his diary, "Money has lost its value. People barter clothes, furniture, anything, for food." Territorially, Germany was stripped of Alsace-Lorraine, returned to France, the Saar was placed under League control, and Poland received a corridor to the sea that cut Germany in two. These losses stoked resentment and a sense of betrayal. Hitler, a fringe agitator in the 1920s, exploited this anger. He promoted the "stab in the back" myth, claiming that Germany had been betrayed by Jews, communists, and weak politicians rather than defeated on the battlefield. He told his followers, "The Versailles Treaty is a document of shame. It must be torn to pieces." The so-called peace had failed to reconcile. Instead, it fueled nationalism, radicalism, and a yearning for revenge. Just as today, harsh punitive measures, such as sanctions or blockades, often breed resistance rather than submission, so too Versailles laid the foundation for extremism. Section 3. The Interwar Years and the Great Depression. The 1920s offered a brief illusion of stability. Under the Weimar Republic, Germany rebuilt, aided by American loans through the Dawes Plan. Cities like Berlin became vibrant centers of art, culture, and democracy. But the prosperity was fragile, tied to international credit and the global economy. When the US stock market crashed in 1929, the shockwave shattered this recovery. The Great Depression spread worldwide. In Germany, unemployment soared to 30%. Families starved, businesses collapsed, and people lost faith in democracy. In Britain, factories shut down. In America, bread lines stretched for blocks. The entire world reeled. It was in this environment of despair that extremism flourished. The communists promised equality and revolution. The Nazis promised jobs, pride, and revenge. "Give me 4 years," Hitler declared in 1933, "and you shall not recognize Germany." For millions of desperate citizens, his words were not empty, they were hope. This dynamic resonates with our world today. Economic crises, whether from pandemics, inflation, or global recessions, can create fertile ground for radical populism. Just as in the 1930s, hardship often fuels anger, polarization, and political extremism. Section 4. The Rise of Hitler and Fascism. While Italy had already embraced Mussolini's fascism in the 1920s, Germany now followed. Hitler's National Socialist Party gained power by exploiting both fear of communism and resentment of Versailles. In January 1933, he became Chancellor. Within months, he consolidated power, outlawing opposition, silencing critics, and establishing a totalitarian regime. The Nazis rearmed Germany, violating Versailles openly. Hitler justified this by declaring, "Germany will either be a world power or will not be at all." Militarization created jobs and restored pride. Propaganda glorified the past and demonized enemies. Youth were indoctrinated. The Gestapo silenced dissent. Meanwhile, Japan pursued its own imperial ambitions. In 1931, it invaded Manchuria, defying the League of Nations. Italy followed suit, invading Ethiopia in 1935. These aggressions revealed the weakness of international institutions. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, pursuing appeasement, famously said in 1938, "Peace for our time," after conceding the Sudetenland to Hitler. But peace was an illusion. The parallels to today are striking. Just as Hitler tested the resolve of the League, modern powers test international institutions. Russia annexing Crimea in 2014 and invading Ukraine in 2022, despite global condemnation, echoes the failures of the 1930s. Aggressors act boldly when they sense that words will not be matched with action. Section 5. The failure of the League of Nations. The League of Nations, envisioned as humanity's safeguard, proved powerless. It had no army, no real enforcement, and depended on the cooperation of its members. The US absence crippled its authority from the start. Japan's invasion of Manchuria in 1931 was condemned but not stopped. Italy's conquest of Ethiopia in 1935 prompted sanctions, But oil, Italy's lifeline, was exempted. Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland in 1936, in direct violation of Versailles. German generals admitted later that if France had resisted, Hitler would have backed down. But France did not act. Neither did Britain. The League stood by, issuing statements but no action. Each failure emboldened aggressors. By the late 1930s, the League was irrelevant. "The League is dead," Italian dictator Mussolini mocked. It was never born. Today, critics make similar arguments about the United Nations. In conflicts from Syria to Ukraine to Gaza, veto powers and divisions often paralyze decisive action. The lessons of the 1930s echo loudly: institutions are only as strong as the will of their members. Section 6: The Road to World War II. By the late 1930s, Europe was sliding toward war. Hitler annexed Austria in 1938 in the Anschluss, welcomed by cheering crowds. He then demanded the Sudetenland, a German-speaking region of Czechoslovakia. Britain and France, desperate to avoid war, agreed at Munich. Chamberlain returned to London, proclaiming peace. But Winston Churchill warned Parliament, "You were given the choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor, and you will have war." In March 1939, Hitler seized the rest of Czechoslovakia, proving appeasement a failure. Then he turned to Poland. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war. The Second World War had begun. The causes were clear: unresolved grievances from World War I, economic desperation, extremist ideologies, and the failure of diplomacy. World War II was not an accident, it was the unfinished business of World War I. Section 7: Modern Parallels. Could there be a World War III? The story of the world between the two wars is not just history, it is a warning. Today, the echoes are unmistakable. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 recalls Germany's aggression in the 1930s. A powerful nation, dissatisfied with borders and fueled by nationalist rhetoric, challenges the world order. Sanctions have been imposed, but just as Versailles bred resentment, they may also harden resolve. The Israel-Hamas conflict echoes unresolved grievances, much like those that destabilized Europe after World War I. Cycles of violence, failed diplomacy, and deep-rooted animosities threaten wider escalation. Meanwhile, US-China tensions over Taiwan and the South China Sea mirror the great power rivalries of the early 20th century. As alliances form and economic competition sharpens, the risk of confrontation looms. If history teaches anything, it is that peace cannot rest on punishment, weakness, or appeasement. It requires justice, cooperation, and vigilance. As Churchill said in 1936, the era of procrastination, of half measures, of soothing and baffling expedients, of delays, is coming to a close. In its place, we are entering a period of consequences. Conclusion: was World War II inevitable? World War I was supposed to end war forever. Instead, it created conditions for an even deadlier conflict. The Treaty of Versailles sowed resentment. The Depression magnified suffering. The League of Nations proved powerless. Leaders chose appeasement over action. By 1939, another global war was all but certain. The lesson for us today is clear. History is not inevitable, it is shaped by choices. If we repeat the mistakes of the past, punitive peace, unchecked aggression, weak institutions, the consequences may once again be catastrophic. The question is not just whether World War II was inevitable, but whether we are avoiding or repeating its lessons. And in a world scarred by conflicts in Ukraine, Gaza, and beyond, the answer remains uncertain. As George Santayana once wrote, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Uncovering Facts for more deep dives into history and the hidden truths that shaped our world.